Yeah, because when something traumatic or difficult happens, it's like such a shock to the system because it's outside of the norm. It's like almost like if you had a filing cabinet with all the papers in it were memories. Like the traumatic ones are like if you balled up the paper and like tried shoving it in there and like it just doesn't get stored correctly because your brain like doesn't know what to do with that.
Getting to a place where you're like, oh, it doesn't have to be this way. And the mental health, oh, it doesn't have to be this way. And then trauma, also it doesn't. Like nothing is set in stone.
Welcome to Under the Sun podcast. I'm Ilea. And I'm Emily. Grab a cup of coffee and join us every other Wednesday as we discuss all things holistic health, faith, relationships, going against the grain, and really everything under the sun. Let's get started and thanks for being here.
So, okay, today is our very first interview with anybody outside of.
Oh, really?
I
feel like super special.
Well, yeah, because you were literally like the number one on my list. I was like, okay,
I feel really special.
Well, I was like, we have not. Let me back up.
Okay.
Me and Lauren have gone to church together for a little while. I'm a hermit, and I usually like sneak in, go to church, and then sneak out because I'm hungry, very hungry by the end of the day. But you're on the top of my list because I follow you on social media, and I just love like what you post and what you do. So do you want to like introduce yourself, like what you do, how you do it?
Yeah.
Anything personal or all work related,
yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. So my name's Lauren Auer, and I own Steadfast Counceling in Peoria, Illinois, which is a private practice. On a personal level, I've got 2 kiddos, almost 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and my husband's in the military, so I'm a military wife. And I've had my practice for a little over a year, and I specialize mainly in trauma, complex trauma, and everything that comes with that. So that's kind of the base, but with anxiety, depression, all of that kind of thing. And then I'm also trained in EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and processing, which is a mouthful. And
that's why they abbreviated it.
Yeah. And people ask what it means. I'm like, it doesn't really matter. You just go with it. And then also Brainspotting. And those are kind of like 2 alternate types of therapy that really kind of like take you beyond verbal processing to really create change in the system. So yeah.
I need more. So let's start with EMDR.
Okay.
And you say rapid eye movement, and you say it so confidently, and I'm like, I feel like I should know what that means. I don't know what that means.
Okay.
Do you want to like, as if you're telling your son what you do?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Like break it down for us.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let me think of an example. So I think a lot of times, I don't know if you've ever felt this way, but like, let's say like self-esteem, right? You might know cognitively, like, yeah, like I look pretty today, and people might say, oh, you look really pretty today, but like, you don't feel pretty, right? Like there's like a disconnect between what people are telling you and what you kind of like know on a surface level, but like, it still exists that you don't feel that. And that's because the logical side of your brain can make sense of that, can make sense of the emotion and what you know, but stored down deeper in our nervous system is all of the stuff that's been stored for a long time and added to and all of that. So in doing just regular talk therapy, that can be really helpful because, you can sort through things, you can put words to your story, you can get some of that out. But that doesn't always mean that you stop like deep down feeling the way that you're feeling. And so EMDR and Brainspotting both. So Brainspotting is a derivative of EMDR, but it focuses a lot on the nervous system and using different like movements. There's a really big connection to like where we look and how we feel when we're sleeping. Everybody goes through like REM sleep, which is where your eyes rapidly move back and forth, and that's actively processing things. So I I'm not going to get like super deep into it, but there's a big calming aspect to it. And it really taps into that like deeper part of your nervous system and helps like release all that stuff that's trapped. So like I can look at your coffee cup that's sitting there and I can tell you it's white and this is the shape of it. I can explain it like with my words, but my nervous system, if you could talk to my nervous system, could explain that 10,000 times more in depth than just what I'm seeing. So a lot of times when we experience, especially something traumatic or difficult, you know, you can tell the story, but like your nervous system experienced it way more than just the story that you know. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like a way to like refile
Yeah.
the information appropriately. Does that sound right? Okay.
Yeah. Because when something traumatic or difficult happens, it's like such a shock to the system because it's outside of the norm that stuff just, it's like almost like if you had a filing cabinet with all the papers in it were memories. Like the traumatic ones are like if you balled up the paper and like tried shoving it in there and like it just doesn't get stored correctly because your brain like doesn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Would you find that the younger you are when that trauma happens, the less ability you have to process it correctly, or does that not have any?
It does. Yeah. There's a lot there. You know, because our nervous systems even experience things when we're preverbal or even when we're in utero. I mean, traumatic or difficult like birth processes can even affect your nervous system because you don't have the words, like the cognitive stuff at the front, you know, but your nervous system still exists. So that does get stored. The good news is there's ways to soothe it and get, you know, more capacity there. It's not like you're just stuck with it. But there's also like people talk about generational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So that looks like if, for instance, like your mom was in a high stress situation or was grieving or was going through whatever herself, you know, her nervous system is going to react to that. That's going to be felt by the baby in utero. It might affect how much capacity she has to bond and care for you. And so that's where like generational trauma can come into play. And again, you're not stuck with it, but understanding it is really, really important to growing that capacity.
Yeah.
Is it possible for like the generational trauma that it doesn't even have to be when you're in utero, can like past traumas that she hasn't dealt with, like be passed on, even if that moment hasn't happened during pregnancy?
Yeah, for sure. Because if, with that example, like if your mom had a lot of trauma in her childhood because of her mom being dysregulated, that's going to affect her. Mm-hmm. And if she doesn't know then how to regulate herself or how to, you know, process things in a healthy way or respond to stress, then when she's a mother, like that's where it gets, you know, added on. And that's where like the beauty, I believe, of therapy is you can actually just like rewrite all of that. You know, anybody could do that at any time. So you're not stuck with it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So then how does Brainspotting, how does that play into it?
It's similar. So, EMDR it kind of recreates that rapid eye movement. So the quick eye movements back and forth. And there's different ways to utilize that. And it can also be done by just like, sometimes that makes people dizzy, or maybe they, I don't know, are prone to seizures or something. You can do the same thing with like hand buzzers in each hand that go back and forth, or they call it like bilateral sound. So like sound going in one ear and then the other. So, it's more about that back and forth of the left brain, right brain than the eye movements. But with Brainspotting, it's more like, it's kind of hard to explain. It's one of those things that like people
are just so interested. It's so cool.
I always tell my clients this. I'm like, it sounds so weird. It sounds so woo-woo. Like
we're pretty used to it.
No, we're good. I resisted getting trained in it for so long because I was just like, that is just like, I don't know about it. And my mom's best friend is a therapist and owns her own practice, and she's trained in it. And she is such a believer in it. She was like, told my mom, like, I'll pay for your daughter to just like get trained in this. And I was like, all right, if it's free, I'll do it.
Yeah.
But it is like absolutely incredible. It's really, instead of that back and forth, it's more so focusing specifically on one spot where you feel the most activation when thinking about something. Which again, I know it sounds so woo-woo, but it's so amazing to me. Like, I'll be doing it with a client who's sitting there going like, what the heck are you talking about? Like, that's so weird. And then I use like a pointer basically to pinpoint a spot, and it's you can see it. Like, I'll find that spot and it's just like a release, or they're like right there. That's the spot, or they're sobbing or something. I mean, it's so weird.
So when you say you find the spot, like, is that more on an emotional level, or are you finding the spot like physically, like within the brain?
Physically, are they under
kind
a
of
scan?
both. Like, no.
Okay.
So
she
like,
said you use a pointer. I was just like, thinking of like a, like if I tried to light on my children, they would be like the cat.
Yeah.
What is it?
I'm visualizing like Grey's Anatomy X-ray, and like she has like a pointer. She's like, "Yep, that's where it is," and like that's and that is not accurate.
I went cat, so that's
it's honestly like not far off though. I mean, so it's like I have the client think of whatever it is that they're wanting to process or they're stuck with. So that could be anything. Like, let's say, I don't know, they get really what they believe is like irrationally angry when like their husband's texting on their phone or something. And so I just have them think about that, like what that is, like what that feels like. And as they're thinking about it, I'm slowly moving this pointer from left to right. And I can tell, like, sometimes if people are like, I don't know, I don't feel anything, like you can see the
like physical change or something.
Oops. Yeah. So, and then once we find that, then I move it up and down to kind of hone it in. And then once it just sits there in that same spot, and they just stare at it and think about that feeling. And it's tapping into that more like felt sense, like the body sensations that come up during that, the other memories that come up that don't even seem related. I mean, I've had people be like, I feel like I'm going to throw up, or like my body feels really hot right now, or like I have a lot of pressure in my neck or whatever. Like, there's a lot of physical sensations and memories that all kind of flood in to that. It's, again, it sounds so woo-woo, but it's amazing.
You don't have to apologize.
Yeah.
We are very woo-woo. I just told you I was switching to a home birth. So
and like, I think between the physical side and the spiritual side, we're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's probably not going to surprise us.
Yeah. Well, and spiritually, like I have a lot of clients who are believers, and I mean, there can be some really cool stuff that happens with that, in particular of, feelings towards God that come up, and felt sense stuff that happens. That's really, really cool to see. But yeah, it's really neat. I don't know.
So I don't know if you know this, but Emily is a NTP, so nutritional therapy practitioner. And you have said before that like sometimes you can help people to a certain extent with their like gut health and liver health, all the things. But at some point they have to go and do like internal work because there's a blockage.
Yeah. I mean, because we're body, soul, and spirit. So you can only do so much, right? If it's not multifaceted, then you're only going to hit one level, and then there's a block. Yeah.
Hence you being here, because we're talking about like, we're not going to upload these in like chronological order, if you will, but we're talking about like preconception and what that means, emotionally, physically, and health wise. Also like in pregnancy and motherhood and development, all that stuff, like everything that encompasses like women's health and mental health is a huge, huge thing.
Yeah. And keep going. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Maybe I'm jumping ahead, but I think some of the concern that I have come across with EMDR specifically is that they had such a bad experience, right? And so I would think just like with any counseling or therapy or anyone really getting into kind of that, that's a vulnerable place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you do it and then you have a really bad reaction or experience, or you walk away with just such heavy grossness
Mm-hmm.
that like you can't shake it, it's hard for people to either want to go back to it, or it's hard, right, for them to.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that that is like an emotion that needed to just be pushed through a little bit more? Or is that more of like a, hey, maybe we should try a different counselor kind of thing?
Yeah, no, that's a really important piece that you just talked about, because I think, like, unfortunately, I've had lots of clients who've had that happen.
Yeah.
And, there's, again, kind of going back to the nervous system, there is a lot of importance that needs to be placed on our capacity and our resources. So when something like with trauma work, like they say, like, fast is slow and slow is fast, because you can get re-traumatized or flooded if you're doing things too quickly. And, I think I am very intentional with my clients about making sure that we build up that capacity, that we don't push it too far, because your nervous system will literally go into like flight or fight or freeze to protect you. And if that's coming up, that means you've pushed your limit. Like it's not good. Like, and I think a lot of times with therapy in particular, people sometimes want to come in and they're like, let's get to it. Yeah. Let's dig in. Let's do all this right now. Cause I just kind of want to be done
detox,
with it.
Right? Like, yeah. I mean, we want to push cause we feel like we didn't do anything.
Exactly.
If you didn't hit this threshold.
Yeah. But if you think about like, I don't know, like if I wanted to go run a marathon, like I'm not a runner. Like I'm not going to just like go sign up and run. Like right. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, like to lead up to that, to grow my capacity so that I don't get injured, and that's sometimes what can happen if it is too much too fast. And unfortunately, I think there are, amazing therapists, and there are also some not so great therapists, just like any field, or maybe people that aren't as in tuned with their client and what they need, and knowing when to kind of put the brakes on things or how to slow things down and pick things back up, all that kind of stuff. So yes, that's a super, super important piece of it, is to be really paced with it and to grow your capacity and to know your capacity before you start just jumping into that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's really important.
So what would you say, like, what is the typical path that, like, okay, a new client comes into you, let's just say a mom or a whatever, what is the typical trajectory you put? I know everyone's different, but like, is there like, oh, hey, let's start with like little micro traumas first and then medium traumas.
Yeah. Well, and even that, like micro traumas, medium traumas.
Those are my terrible.
I know. Yeah, but
this is not medical advice.
But we all have different capacities too. And what I mean by that is, like, my micro trauma could be your major trauma and vice versa. Yeah. So I really want to get to know the whole person. I want to know what they've already experienced. I want to know physically, health-wise, what's going on. I want to know what their support system is. I want to know what their family structure looks like. I want to know what their, all of the things that they're surrounding themselves with in the day. I mean, if I'm only speaking to them like an hour a week, there's a lot of hours in that week that they're not with me. So I'm always curious to know what is going to be done when they're not there. So I do a lot of just like baseline, kind of like, where are we at? Where do we want to be? And that can look so different for everybody. And I'm usually, I feel like at this point in my career, I'm pretty good at having a good understanding of what that baseline can be. Like, have they already done a lot of work? Are they, I don't know, physically healthy? Do they potentially need to be on a medication at this time can we get that figured out? You know, because that could potentially increase capacity. Yeah. So it's hard to like look for that, you know, I guess process in that way. But I definitely want to make sure that if those resources aren't there, that first thing is just building it up. Like, are they taking care of themselves? Can they take care of themselves better? Like, what can they add to their life? How can they be more aware of what's going on in their body? If they're starting to feel like depressed or anxious, for instance, like, are they noticing what's leading up to that? Like, where they feel it, what's going on, how they reacted, and like just getting really in tune with themselves. Because I want them to be able to tell me, like, whoa, that's too much, or let's take a step back. Because I want them to be really aware of what's going on inside of them, because I want them to steer the ship. Like, it's for them. So I want them to tell me if something's not working. But a lot of people don't even know what's leading up, or like, what are those things that are happening in their body, or they're not aware of where their limits are. So that's kind of step one.
Yeah. I feel like that's probably step one.
Well,
In all things, right?
well, and we've talked at length and you've done a lot more research on this, but that sometimes probably with trauma too, but also with health, like when you just feel bad for so long, like your gut, say if you felt so bad in your gut for so long, they eventually you just stop feeling it and you stop noticing it. And you just kind of come in agreement with it. You're just like, oh, well, I just feel bad all the time. And that's just my genetics. That's my life. That's whatever. It's the same it sounds like the same with mental health. That's like people just kind of settle.
And it makes sense, right? Like, you shut your body off, you're going to shut your mind off too. Like, you're like, what is controlling you from saying like, oh, something is off today. Right. And so I would think with almost any amount of healing on any capacity, no matter if it's, you know, body, soul, or spirit, that like it really has to depend on if you have the ability to even recognize what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even like beyond that, there's a lot of like socialized things too, where maybe in somebody's family, they were punished for feeling angry, or maybe what got them attention was only when they were happy and pleasant, or maybe if they hurt themselves, it was like, hey, like, you're fine, like, stop crying, you know, and it was just kind of brushed past. That maybe they don't even have a lot of experience feeling like they can feel their feelings, or that, what does that even mean to feel my feelings? Or do I have feelings? Or, you know, like, all of that can just build up so much over time that, you know, it's not like we don't have feelings. It just means if you're not getting angry when something makes you angry outwardly, you're getting angry internally, and that is creating inflammation in your body, and that is creating a whole bunch of stuff. So it's just being aware of that, and what is happening there is like a huge, huge thing. And even on like a super basic level of just recognizing your needs and like honoring them. Like, I've even have clients where I'm like, I want you this week that every time you feel like you have to pee, go pee. And they're like, oh my gosh, I peed so much this week. It's like, yeah, because you just ignore it.
Yeah. I mean, I have a couple clients recently who, you know, when talking about like their children not going to the bathroom, right? And like, you have to poop twice a day or more, and these kids aren't. And then I'm always quick to say, like, what are schools' rules around when you can go to the bathroom? And most of the time, I mean, we're talking like anywhere from 5 to mostly through junior high. Once you hit high school, it's a little bit better. But it seems like these kids, I mean, some of these kids are allowed, especially with COVID rules, they're only allowed to go to the bathroom once a day.
Oh my gosh.
Like, are you joking me?
That's
like,
awful.
So what do? Like, like you said, you start to shut off that place in your brain that says, I'm not allowed to do that. So you're not going to drink water. You're not going to feel safe. So of course you're not going to go to the bathroom. And then how do you shut that off when you go back home?
Right.
Like, that just doesn't.
Right. And so often, like, when I do that homework, I guess, if you want to call it, with
Yeah.
my clients, it's like, they're not sitting there like feeling like they're holding
Yes.
it all day. They just like they're not even attuned to that until they're consciously trying to attune to that. So it's not like they feel like they even are holding it or like they don't need to go. It's just that's shut off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably like it's good to get like a third party. So someone else to be like, it's okay to like acknowledge you have to pee. I mean, that's obviously the simplistic version, but like for you to be like, it's okay to have emotions and like just a simple act of saying like, it's okay to, you know, to a certain, within the right parameters,
I know some people that have
emotions.
way too many emotions and you're like, okay, but your emotions lie a little bit sometimes too, right? So like, is this truth? Like Alex is a great example the other day. It's like, yeah, he was frustrated with something, you know, and it's like, well, in this moment, I feel lonely. Like, okay, but we can also understand that we're surrounded by people. So is that logical? And he was like, so he's like, no. So I'm like, okay, so it's something deeper, right? Like, because we know that we are surrounded by people. So where's that loneliness stemming from?
Yeah.
But like the ability to like actually say, you know, because otherwise, what does he want to do? He wants to go hide, which actually makes him more lonely because, right?
Yeah.
But I'm like, he's in a very loving environment where we can sit and like, okay, where is that loneliness stemming from then?
Yeah.
Because it's not because you have a lack of people. So it's a lack of being understood for him in that situation. He wasn't feeling heard. So that made him feel lonely.
Yeah.
But that tendency is to go isolate. Then you agree with the lie that, yes, I am alone. No one understands me. But you actually are the one who removed yourself, right? And so sometimes I think too, people are like, well, no, see, like I'm an angry person. And I'm like, but let's keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. I often like refer to anger and some other emotions too as like an iceberg emotion.
Yes.
That like sometimes people just don't have the language or they're feeling sensations in their body and they go to anger because that's just the go-to, right? Or sometimes like anger feels powerful or it feels productive or it feels like they're in control more. But if you really look at it, there's a lot going on under that, like maybe like loneliness or embarrassment or fear or whatever, that if you throw that all in a pot and boil it, it sometimes comes out as anger. But yeah, my clients make fun of me because I'm always like, get curious. Like why are you feeling that in your chest or your breathing? Or, okay, you felt really angry. Like, let's get curious about why and like, where did that come from? And giving yourself language for that too can be really great.
Yeah. Do you think sometimes too, it's like they were told this is what the parent saw or a teacher saw or something. So now they agree with that, whether it's actually truth or not. Like you're actually, like you said, like you're actually not, like maybe it's presenting an anger. Maybe it's not anger at all. Maybe it's just that you were told that you doing this, you know, or like, you know, taking deep breaths or getting red face, like, oh, well, that's anger. So does that make sense? I don't know if you ever.
Yeah. And I think like a lot of times, like a strong anger reaction is more of like a like fight response, which like fight, flight, freeze, right? And fawn, which is also really important. I don't want to leave that one out. But yeah, so, but we go into fight response when there's fear and when there's this like physiological need to like get out, move, fight back, whatever that is. And that could come more from like, I'm embarrassed, I want to run away, or I'm, you know, feeling ignored, I want attention. You know, there's a lot more going on under the surface there.
You said fight, flight, freeze. What was the other one you said?
Fawn.
Fawn.
Yeah. So
I'm not sure.
It's new, right? It's kind of new.
yes, we've put language to it more recently, but I think like, so just on a general level, right? Like fight is like, I want to fight back.
Right.
So if you, I don't know, if somebody came to like steal your purse, right? Fight would be like, I'm going to punch them in the face. Flight is like, I'm going to run as fast as I can. Freeze is just like complete, like, I don't know what to do, frozen. Fawn is the response where you, in order to feel safe and make things feel better, you might say, oh, go ahead, take my purse. Like, it's okay. Like, you're almost like playing to that person's emotions or going along with it, or sometimes even acting like you enjoy it or whatever. Enabling. Yeah. Just to make yourself feel safe. So, you know, that comes up a lot. I work a lot with people that have been in abusive situations of all sorts. And, you know, it's not uncommon that their reaction towards an abuser or someone that was abusing them was like being really nice to that person, going along with it, pretending like it was okay, all of that kind of stuff, because maybe that was the safest way to feel in those situations. So yeah, I think that does need to be like normalized, because there's so much shame that comes with that kind of response of like, what's wrong with me? Or I added to it, or I should have blah, 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 you know, over and over again. But like, that might've been the thing that kept them safe. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Because I mean, I feel like would that, maybe this is totally not related at all, but like when people respond to a situation in a normal way, would you say that there could be some of that at play where they're like, have just learned to respond? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is a lot of that how they respond as an adult, how they maybe adapted to their environment, like their parents, like how they learned to deal with their parents' reactions? Like, I don't know, if I get angry with dad, I'll get this response, but I know if I'm like really nice to mom, I'll get what I want. Like, does it, how they react as an adult kind of stem from the childhood and the parents?
I think it can in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it mirrors it. Like that's what they saw. So that's what they learned and that's what they do. Other times it goes against it, right? Like if they grew up in a household where, I don't know, everyone was pleasant and stuffing feelings all the time, maybe they're really angry or, you know, outwardly expressive in their own emotions as a way to like try to reclaim what they couldn't have now that they can and it feels safe. Yeah. So I think, you know, that can look a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times our go-to responses to things has roots in something. And then we're interacting with other people who have their own responses that have roots in, like, our nervous systems are communicating with other people's nervous systems, and it can get really complicated sometimes. But like with relationship stuff, for you to understand like why you do that, what your go-to is, why that's the case, and be in tune with that to be able to tell yourself sometimes like, wait, I actually don't need to do that right here because this is a different situation. You know, and for your partner to do the same kind of work. So you understand each other and where you're coming from and what you need. That's super important.
So obviously everyone should probably go to therapy and deal with stuff. So as people are like working through trauma, past trauma, that's great. What do people do right now to change to where they don't add to that filing system? You know? Does that make sense? Where, like, are there tips that you can give moms, really anybody? We'll just target it to females, but that they can do that can kind of maybe not add to the pile of traumas.
Yeah. That makes sense. Well, and I think like, you know, these past several years is like a perfect example of that there's stress all around us. Situations are different. There's a lot of conflict about politics, about someone in the family thinks this and someone in the family thinks that. And so it's kind of hard to avoid. I mean, you get on social media and it's all over the place. You go anywhere. And like, again, that will flood your nervous system and impact. It's like what you take in is going to come out somehow. So what can you do to not add to that is, first of all, like, know your limits and be in touch with that. Like, okay, if I'm feeling really stressed or I'm not sleeping well or I'm having a lot of stomach issues or whatever, get curious. Like there's a reason for that. Like what needs to be limited, what boundaries need to be set, what things can be avoided. You know, that is really huge, being able to know what you need, because everybody is going to be different in that sense. We all have what's called like a window of tolerance. And, you know, there's this level for each of us where we're feeling calm and happy and things are good. And depending on your history, depending on maybe your life stresses, depending on whatever's going on in your life, that window may be smaller or bigger. Especially if you have unprocessed trauma, it's going to be smaller, which means it's going to be harder to stay there. So we often will go, if we go up from that window of tolerance, we're in like hyper arousal, which is like feeling anxious, feeling angry, wanting to like yell or having panic reactions, that kind of thing. And then at the other side of that, down below your window of tolerance, is hypoarousal, which is like, I'm shutting down. Like, I don't want to be around anybody. I'm feeling depressed. I'm like, you know, checking out, done. Right. So part of that is understanding where you're at. Like if you notice yourself checking out and wanting to lay in bed all day, like in order to get back up to your window of tolerance, you need to like the solution isn't take a day off, lay in bed all day, watch Netflix, because that's going to keep you like in that hypoarousal state. It would be better to like call a friend, go grab coffee, go for a walk, do something active to try and move back up, and vice versa. If you're feeling really anxious or angry, maybe don't go punch a punching bag or like do a cycling class in that moment. Not that those things are bad, but what your system needs might be to take a day off and to relax and do something calming. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like counterintuitive to what people say. The
Often,
analogy of like, if you're angry, just, you know, take a boxing class. And it's like, that's probably what I would have thought up until this like 20 seconds ago.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because your nervous system is just, I don't know, not really communicating what it actually needs in that moment then, right? Or are we not perceiving it correctly?
I think like it is often like human tendency to like, you know, what's the like remain in action, right? Like keep following the way that you're feeling. Like, yeah, like I'm feeling angry, so I just need to like run and punch things and do all the things. But like that might not necessarily be the worst thing, but then how are you going to then come off of that, you know? Or something makes you really angry and you just want to like rant about it and get all angry about it. And like, you know, that's just amping you up. So you need to do something counter to that to get you back to a state of like regulation. It's really like, honestly, if you think of it that way with that window of tolerance, it's pretty like simple, really. Like, oh, I'm up, I need to come down, or I'm down, I need to come up. But we don't like think that way oftentimes. So
it's like a number line, right? Like we're always trying to get back to that zero, that balance. So if we're way too far, we have too many pluses, then we need to do something to bring us back to zero. And if you're negative, you got to bring something to zero. I mean, that's the whole body, whether it's all about homeostasis, right?
Right.
Like trying to rebalance. So it totally makes sense.
And if you have an impulse, like something makes you really angry and you just want to yell or whatever, you know, follow that impulse. I mean, if it's appropriate, right? But, you know, you don't want to like stifle it to keep that energy in necessarily. You want to let it out, but then go back to homeostasis. Like that's all important too. And it's more just about noticing what's happening and figuring out how to balance those things. So, yeah.
I can't remember where I heard it, but maybe it was, we did like a communication course. You probably get so sick of hearing about this. Dave and I did it. When we first got married, Dave and I, we did a communications course, which was the best thing. We had a great relationship before, but I'm like, oh, our communication just was heightened. But I think he said, he's like, either you're a thermometer or you're a thermostat. You either like go into the room and you read the room and your emotions that can be change with every person you interact with, or you can walk into the room and be a thermostat and not be affected. I feel like, I don't know, in 2020, we're not in 2020.
We're 2 years later.
2022. We are. I think everyone though I talk to, they're like, I still say 2020.
I know.
It's like, are we living there? Like what? Are we stuck there? Does our nervous system know it's 2 years later?
It might not, honestly. Well, and I mean, on a practical level, like it's still like all around us, right? Like everywhere you go, there's signs about masks or, COVID vaccination, like it is everywhere. I mean, we are literally still there in a lot of senses. So yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any advice you would give to, I don't know, anybody who's struggling through, just say like 20, let's just say 2020, but in general, like, is the first step then to like start seeing a counselor? If so, how do you find one that you can trust? Because
that's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a great question because I think that is hard for people to find. And, I am like the biggest advocate of like, if you are seeing somebody and you're not jiving or there's something that's just like, it doesn't feel like it's really helping or whatever, just like stop then. Again, like listen to yourself because it could just not be a great fit. I mean, it's the same way of like, if you were seeing, I don't know, just like a regular family doctor and that doctor wasn't really helping you or listening to you or missing the point of what you were looking for, or even if their like personality was weird or something, like you wouldn't probably continue to go to that person, I would assume, right? So
you would hope.
I think most people do, which I'm a big proponent of like, like if they're being rude or belittling, fire them and say, you're not my doctor anymore. I'm not paying you for this.
Yeah.
But a lot of people I think do stay in that like, well, I don't agree, but my family doctor told me to do this. I'm like,
yeah.
He don't have to live with you
right.
and live your day-to-day life. It is your decision.
Well, and it's the same thing, like going back to like go pee when you have to pee, right? Like be in tune with your needs. If you're sensing whatever, like get curious about it, honor it. Like don't continue to see that person. Like I would want anybody that saw me, like if I wasn't that person for them, to find somebody who can be. So yes, that's important. I think it gets complicated too with like insurance and what therapists take what and, schedules and wait lists. Right now, the past 2 years, I mean, it's wonderful that people are getting therapy, but there's also long wait lists at a lot of places, unfortunately. So yeah, that can definitely be a barrier. I think if ever possible, like personal recommendations are great. Like if somebody you know and trust had a good experience with a certain person, that's good. Also psychologytoday.com, that's like a search hub for therapists. So you can put in like, I have, whatever, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I'm looking for a female and I want to work on anxiety and I live in Peoria and I'm open to telehealth or whatever. You can put in all your stuff and it'll show you everybody that fits that. And then each of those people has like a profile where they kind of explain like what they do. Usually it talks a little bit about them on a personal level and what they're skilled in working with. So you can kind of go through and see like, ooh, I think that person might be a good fit for me. And kind of narrow it down. Also, one of the good things about COVID is that it opened up the doors for telehealth because a lot of medical insurance didn't like even let people do that before 2020. Like it wasn't even a thing that could be covered by insurance. And now it's so commonplace. Like I have clients all over the state. So I'm licensed in the state of Illinois, and that's how therapists work for the most part. Some people have multiple states, but you are kind of constricted to your state boundary, but there might be a perfect fit in Chicago, if you're living in central Illinois or southern Illinois, that you can see over video and it's great, you know? So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you're open to it, it can really widen the search. But yeah, those are some good places to start. Also, a lot of people offer a free 15-minute phone consultation. I do that. So if they just want to like chat and be like, this is what I'm going through, to kind of get a vibe for somebody, that's a lot of people do offer that as well. So yeah.
Awesome. Because I think people are so used to like, okay, I know how to find a doctor to figure out why I have knee pain, but like they're, as I talk to other friends who I've done some therapy, there's always more work to do, but there's, like, they don't know where to start. Like, I don't know where to start. Who do you recommend? And I'm like, well, I don't know your personal needs. And so I've never had that answer of like, do X, Y, and Z. So now I'll just be like, go to this podcast, go around the 35-minute step.
Yeah.
But also, is there like a positive thing you're seeing that's coming out of the last 2 years with people? Is it that they maybe have standards for how they treat themselves or let people?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know. I guess it's negative, but positive too, that a lot of people have kind of just been managing, and events over the past couple years have been like the straw that broke the camel's back, which isn't good, but it got them into therapy, or it got them into actually look at their health, or it got them into, I need a different career or whatever. So I think it really has caused a lot of people to evaluate like, okay, I've been managing this, but this isn't going to work anymore. So I need to do something for myself. So in that sense, I think it's been really good. I mean, I can't even tell you like how many clients I have now that this is like their first time ever thinking about therapy. Even people that are like much later in their life, that they're like, you know, I've been in my house for a year and a half and I am gonna like lose it. Like I've never been open to therapy, but I don't know what else to do, you know, which I'm like, good, like, yay. So that's good. And I think too, just like across the board, mental health has been a little more normalized and less stigmatized, which is amazing. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely been some good moves forward in that sense with that over the past couple of years. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any other questions?
I don't think so.
Is there anything that you wanted to hit and touch on?
Gosh, let me think. I mean, all of that, a lot of what I talked about today, including like how to find a therapist and stuff, it's all, I have like articles on my website that I've written, and that's just steadfastcounceling.com. So there's more info there about like EMDR, Brainspotting, and all that kind of stuff. And then also I post a lot on my business Instagram, which is just at Steadfast Counceling. So if people want more info.
Are you taking new clients?
I am, but I have a wait list. So
what does that mean?
It just, wait lists are kind of hard to predict how long they are going to be, but it just means that like I don't know that I'll ever completely shut the door on taking new clients. Yeah. If somebody's open to waiting, I don't know, depending on their availability, because if they can only do, you know, I don't know, after 7 p.m. on a Sunday or whatever, like obviously that's not going to work with my schedule. And I would refer them out. I'm always happy to give people suggestions of people I would recommend if they just reach out to me. But yeah, if they're okay with waiting like a couple months or something, I'm more than happy to keep them on my wait list. Sometimes it's less than that, sometimes more, just depending on their availability. But yeah, I mean, I'm always willing to point people in the right direction. And I also understand that sometimes people just like, now is the time, like they just can't wait any longer. And that's totally understandable. And I know I have a couple close colleagues who I know are currently can like take a new client next week. So I'm happy to pass that information on as well. So yeah.
You are a wealth of knowledge. It is exciting and refreshing.
I totally geek out about this stuff. I like talking about it because no one else wants to listen to me.
I will listen. What is the thing you geek out the most about?
Probably
that verbiage was not great, but yes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I just think like our brains and our bodies are so fascinating. Like it's just...
See, that's what we geek out about. That's why we have this podcast. Because
I'll come talk to you guys anytime. But yeah. I mean, I just think it's super, super fascinating. And, you know, how many stories I've heard of people who've gone to doctor after doctor and medication after medication and all of the things, and they're still stuck. And it's like, okay, well, there's a reason for that. And just to see them get unstuck is like, it's so cool. It's the best.
That's, I feel like that's how I feel about like health. Cause do you know who the comedian John Mulaney is? Mm-hmm. I don't know what's happening in his current life, but like 8 years ago, my husband and I listened to his, like stand up on the way to Yellowstone. And he has like a joke where he's like, before I had a girlfriend, I had no standards for how I should be treated. It was like, before I met Emily, I didn't know like how good I could feel, because I did come into an agreement with like, I guess like it's my genetics that my knees hurt because my dad's knees hurt. And it like, I must just be, you know, brain foggy every day because like, I don't know, my mom has brain fog and she was always sleepy growing up. So maybe that's just it. And I think it's kind of parlaying into like health, getting to a place where you're like, oh, it doesn't have to be this way. And the mental health, oh, it doesn't have to be this way. And then trauma, also it doesn't, like nothing is set in stone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where the brain is so fascinating, right? Like the ability to change pathways in the brain is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing because I think a lot of times people just think, oh, well, I've had this trauma or I've had this health thing or whatever. And this is just my life now. But like, it doesn't have to be. And it is so cool just to see them make that difference of coming in and being like, I have not felt anxious in like 2 weeks. I didn't even think that was possible. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, it's possible. Isn't it so cool? Like I get so excited.
Tell everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a parting question. Do you have?
Nope. You're
okay.
Good. You're good.
So you're a therapist and you're a mom. What do you get asked this a lot of like, what is like a parenting tip of like, cause like people do say like, oh, you're fine. Get up, just shake it off. You're fine. And that's, like when I take my nephews they're grown now, but when I did take my nephews to the park, you'd hear that all the time. It's like, you're fine, just shake it off. And it's like, what is the parenting tip that?
Right. And I'm totally do that to my kids all the time too. Yeah. You know,
there's a time and a place
sometimes
to be like
reaction to you. Like they're waiting to see how you're going to react. Like if you're like, yeah, you're good. Then they're like bleeding and they're like, I'm fine. You're like, yeah, we'll just put a Band-Aid on that. We'll be good. We're good. Sometimes I think it's a reaction too.
Yeah.
I think why parents do that where it's like, you're fine, buddy. You're fine.
Dave tells the story of have you met my husband?
A little bit.
Okay.
Briefly.
He tells the story of he fell on his rollerblades and broke his arm, and his arm was coming out of his skin, and he like went up to his mom like with his arm like that, and he was like, and she's like, oh, you're fine, and just got like newspaper and started rolling it up, and she's like, you're fine, and he was like, yeah, I think that traumatized me because I remember seeing my phone and being like, Mom, I don't think I'm fine.
Yeah, send him to come see me. I think we could probably work through some of that.
Yeah, there's more than just that, but yeah.
But yeah, I think like to answer your question, it's a great question because I think sometimes like even what I was saying today about, you know, we feel the stress like in the womb and like through the birthing process and stuff. I think it's hearing that and knowing that as moms, it's like, oh my gosh, like my kids are going to be like, there's nothing I can do. Like, it's like a lot of pressure to be like, I can't do this and I need to do that. And I need to be regulated and I can't be stressed because, you know, but honestly, like that's not the goal to be perfect. It's more to, through the natural stresses and things of life that are going to happen, to be able to have your child see you handle it well, or when you don't handle it well, own that you didn't handle it well and repair it. Like kind of like going back to that homeostasis of like, you can like blow up on your kid when your fuse is short, and it could be like not a good situation, and then come back to them and be like, whoa, like that wasn't cool. Like I totally overreacted and I'm really sorry. And that is what's important, because they need to see that. Because if they never see that, they're going to think their overreactions or their feelings are shameful or can't be talked about or shouldn't. Like, you're teaching them how to get back there. So really, it's like, take all the pressure off and just be a human and like own it when you need to, and like regulate yourself and regulate your kid. So even if you're like, oh, you know, you're fine. Here's some newspaper, you know, like you can like come back to that and be like, okay, when that happened, you know, maybe you wouldn't be like, I would in my brain be like, well, I went into freeze mode there because I was really scared and I didn't know what to do. And so that's how I reacted. And that wasn't okay of me, you know, like, or just that wasn't the best reaction. And I'm sorry. You're like, that's all. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. The end.
Okay.
Thanks for being here with us today. We would love to connect with you over on Instagram at underthesun_podcast. Please help us out by subscribing on YouTube, leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcast. We'll see you next time.